This is Top of Mind, the Dr. Patrick Slowinski Show.
Welcome back to another episode of Top of Mind with Dr. Patrick Slowinski. Today we're truly honored to welcome a fascinating guest whose career in diplomacy and service to our country are nothing short of inspiring. Ambassador Tatiana Gfoeller spent over 30 years as a U.S. diplomat, serving in some of the world's most challenging regions. She was the U.S. ambassador to Kyrgyzstan, where she kept open a critical supply route to U.S. Forces in Afghanistan and protected American citizens during a time of violent unrest. She also advised senior military leadership at Pentagon, held top posts in the Middle East and Russia, and became one of the most decorated diplomats of her generation. Beyond her government service, she was taught at Georgetown University, written on international affairs, and mentored countless young people, especially women, who aspire to careers in foreign policy. This is going to be an incredible conversation, and thank you so much for tuning in. To our followers, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend. And now let's dive in. Ambassador, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's an honor to be on your show.
Ambassador, it's so great to see you. You and I have spoken a little bit. We kind of hang around same organizations a bit, being two retired diplomats, and we know a lot of the same people. So I wanted to bring you on to talk to our audience today about a couple things. First, you're also an expert on Russia, and I consider myself somewhat of someone who has experience in Russia, having served there as well and speak Russian. Well, we wanted to talk about President Trump's big meeting with President Putin this week in Alaska, and not just how it affects the Ukraine situation, which is the priority, rightly so, to end that war, but also where we might see and where you might see U.S.-Russia relations going, because for the past 4 or 5 years, they have not been going in an upward direction at all. So I want to talk a little bit about that. But before we get into the politics of today and the foreign affairs events of today, I want to talk a little bit about you, what inspired you to become a diplomat. And so if you could just tell us a little bit about your journey, how you became a diplomat, and maybe some highlights and potential lowlights, if any, that you want to share with us.
Sure. Well, really my motivation was patriotism, as I think it is for most people who want to become diplomats and serve their country. But in my case, there was a particular flavor to patriotism. My father's family were refugees from Eastern Europe, and I was brought up with twin feelings, an interesting combination of absolute hatred of communism and absolute love for the people that suffered under communism. That is Eastern Europeans, Russians, Kyrgyz, you name it, including Chinese, by the way, but I didn't have as much of a ethnic link to China, but I still felt terribly, and still do, to be honest, for the Chinese people who suffer under communism. So this impetus I had to honor and serve my country, but at the same time to help free the captive peoples who were suffering under communism was overwhelming to me. And diplomacy was the absolute perfect solution to doing that. And I was very honored. My first posting was Poland, where because of my youth, and I was 23 when I joined the Foreign Service. And so I was young, but I looked even younger. The chargé d'affaires at that time, we didn't have ambassadors because of the very bad relationship we had with communist Poland. Anyway, because of my youth, the chargé asked me to be basically a secret messenger to Lech Wałęsa, who was at that time under house arrest in Gdańsk. So I would take the train all by myself and go from Warsaw to Gdańsk and pass letters from the chargé to Lech Wałęsa, and then back from Lech Wałęsa to the chargé. And it was exhilarating stuff. It was better than I could have ever imagined, to be honest. And that feeling of helping free the Polish people, of working with Solidarity, of working with the Catholic Church, which was a very important voice for the voiceless at that time, kind of the only organized opposition that was tolerated, though certainly not liked by the communist regime. All that was even better than I had expected. And, I've just loved my 33 years in the Foreign Service so much. It's an amazing opportunity to contribute to things that most people, they want to contribute, but they can't. And the State Department gives you that opportunity. That's what I always tell my mentees. When they ask me, what do you think about joining the Foreign Service? And I say, yes, definitely.
Oh yeah, it's one of the best decisions I made. And at the time, I wasn't sure. At 23, I assume you came right out of college. I
Yes,
had
I
already,
went
I
from
had already.
Georgetown.
You did. You came right out and specialized program for foreign service or something different.
That's right. I did the 5-year program as one of the 5 guinea pigs for the 5-year program because I didn't do my senior year of undergraduate. I went straight into the master's. So I did my BS and MS in foreign service in 5 years, and it worked out great.
And you know that traditionally, a lot of people on the East Coast and some on the far West Coast, they have programs and infrastructure, if you will, set up to kind of support younger people going into the foreign service. We're kind of the middle of the country, in my opinion, has been overlooked. So one of the things I'm trying to do is to get that message out across the country to everybody to take a look at the foreign service and not just the ones who were blessed like you that had a university that had a specific program, because I think we really need a diversity of thought in our foreign service for sure.
Absolutely. And on that note, let me just mention my 5th year was partially financed by a grant from DACOR, which is an organization, it stands for Diplomatic and Consular Officers Retired. And I was very grateful for that grant. And I'm now a long-standing member of DACOR, and I'm on the education committee. And precisely along the lines you mentioned, I'm always pushing for the scholarship to be given to students from universities in the South, in the Midwest, those that have been overlooked historically. I think that's an aspect of diversity that often isn't mentioned in our sort of the elite discussions that we have about foreign policy and who is qualified to be a foreign service officer. And I really push as much as I can for that diversity to be geographic as well as ethnic, religious, etc.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the women issues that you've worked on. When you joined the Foreign Service, we certainly didn't have the percentage of female officers that we have now. And how has that changed, and how have women become more attracted to a career in the Foreign Service?
Well, I'll tell you, without naming any names, let's say one of my first bosses, I entered the Foreign Service as a member of a tandem couple. In other words, my husband was also a Foreign Service officer. And one of my first bosses called my husband into his office and said, you are such a promising young officer. I can see you doing so well in your career. Just please get your wife to quit her job. She is such an impediment to your career. And my husband, being the kind of man he is, immediately came home and told me this, horrified. So that was definitely a shock. Then another boss just spoke very openly about his dissatisfaction with the fact that women were allowed to remain in the service after they had married, which was a reform, little known, was made by President Nixon. Because back before, if a woman Foreign Service officer got married, she immediately had to resign. So this boss of mine said, oh, that was such a mistake on President Nixon's part. And at least they should really resign if they get pregnant. It is so unprofessional for a Foreign Service officer to be pregnant. And at the time I was pregnant. He just didn't know it. So that was another kind of shock. And to add a little something funny about that, at the time I was stationed in Saudi Arabia. And When Ramadan comes around, a Saudi man is prohibited from seeing any woman who was not one of his four wives, his mother, his daughter, or his sister. Well, my job, I was a junior officer, was to deliver demarches to the foreign ministry. So clearly people had to see me. Otherwise, how could I hand over the demarche? So I was mortified. It's Ramadan, I'm pregnant, and I basically can't do my job. And then the foreign ministry of Saudi Arabia came through with a wonderful solution to my problem. They issued me a temporary certificate that I was a man. And so whenever I went into the foreign office, I would just show that certificate. And people would be like, oh, okay, you're a man. Unfortunately, after Ramadan was over, they took my certificate away from me. Otherwise, I would be showing it to you on this podcast because it was really one of the highlights of my career.
People don't realize how complex and funny in retrospect our career as diplomats can be. And but you know what isn't funny is that I think a lot of those traditions and regulations that you talked about, I think they stymied a lot of promising female diplomats are coming into the service for much too long. I do say I the other day before I knew that you we were having you on as a guest and that this is something that you're passionate about is mentoring all officers, but in particular women, because you have the unique perspective of having gone through the process to become an ambassador. We'll talk about that in a second. But I think you have this opportunity to mentor women to pick this career. And as I was looking through it, I found out I did some simple math, and I had more female bosses than I had male bosses. And that I did the math, let's say from 2024. And so in 2024, over a 22-year career, I had more female bosses than I had male bosses. So there has been some change, you know, and there I looked at the numbers not too long ago, and they're pretty close with the officers. Officers, female and male. Where there is still disparity is in leadership roles. Men still have an edge on that. But the gap between the Foreign Service officers between male and female has been closing pretty quickly over the last 10, 20 years.
Oh, absolutely. And these two examples I offered were from the very beginning of my career. And over time, um, opportunities became much greater for women. And I would say that towards the end of my career, I didn't see any discrimination at all.
Yeah. No, just lots of opportunity. And here's the thing that a lot of people in the Foreign Service, people looking at the Foreign Service don't understand is that sometimes you're just in the right place at the right time and willing to go somewhere where other people aren't. And then you can turn that into other opportunities.
Absolutely. I think the State Department has made great progress. I'm wearing, I don't know if you can see it, it's a scarf that was made in honor of Ambassador Ruth Davis, who recently passed away. And she broke so many barriers in her career, barriers for women, barriers for people of color. I'm really happy to be honoring her. And the State Department has to be commended, I think. I mean, it really, by the end of my career, I didn't see discrimination against people of color. I didn't see discrimination against women. I think we're over this. It's a success.
Yeah, I would say some people would say that, you know, at least on the conservative side, that DEI went a little bit too far on the other way.
Yes, definitely.
And so
People could say that.
so hopefully the State Department, like all federal agencies and all companies in general, are hiring folks based on their merit and making that the priority. I think that's important. You said something that was fascinating to me, and I had remembered, and then forgotten that you served in Poland. And you know me, I'm a big Polophile, and I spent a lot of my career in Poland. And even before, I've spent years going to school and living and working in Poland. And you talked about Lech Wałęsa. And um, you know, it's interesting to see how people change over time. Politically, he is on the very left now, and very anti conservatism in Poland. But what he did was an amazing thing. And it's interesting to see how diplomats have to kind of adjust to the political situations in their countries they are, and they can't let their personal opinions while they're being a diplomat. You and I are both retired. So we can say things more openly. But, diplomats that are out there have to keep that ability to be diplomatic, even when they look at a situation that they don't like. And one of the things I know from my biographies is we both served in addition to Poland and Russia, we both served in Turkmenistan. So how do you, as a diplomat, convey policy from your government when you're seeing atrocious, oppressive things happening in the country that you're assigned to?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's really a difficult problem because on the one hand, you want to stand for America's values, but on the other hand, you want to do things that are good for America first.
Right.
And after that, if there is bandwidth, do things for the people that you're living amongst. Turkmenistan, it's interesting. I was chargé d'affaires there for a number of months, DCM the rest of the time. Uh,
For
I
our listeners, it's deputy chief of mission. So that's like the assistant ambassador.
Correct, yes. And I developed actually a good relationship with Turkmenbashi. On a personal level, he was quite charming. He was also very eccentric. I would go to his office on a regular basis, and I never knew what color his hair would be.
Hmm.
Occasionally, it would be, I assume, what it had been when he was young, which was black. Occasionally, it would be white, which I assumed was what his hair was now. Once it was bright yellow. And what really tickled me pink, Bomo, I succumbed to it, was he had hot pink hair one day. And so these seemed like really nice eccentricities, something one could laugh about. And then there were the political prisoners, the dissidents, who were in appalling prison conditions. And there was, particularly, there were 5 people whom we had documented for the Human Rights Report and all that. And I got a very welcome directive from Washington saying, you have to go in and you have to confront him and you have to just demand their release. And so I did. And he said, well, how about if I organize a meeting for you with them? And you'll see that they're being treated really well, and they'll tell you how well they're treated. And so I said, fine. That was at least one step forward. I'd get to see them. So I came back, and there they were. And they looked terrible, frankly, beaten and abused and all that kind of thing. And then, but they had been told to say in a very, very broken English, we're fine, we're fine. And then they were told, okay, leave. And then they were all filing out of the room. And one of them turns and just screams in Russian at me, I'm being beaten, I'm being tortured. What an appalling scene, you can imagine. I didn't know what to do. And so I just jumped up out of my seat in front of the president. And I shook this man's hand. That was all I could do. And then they were ushered out, rather abruptly, rather aggressively ushered out, I may say so. And then I turned to the president and I said, please release these people. I'm going to have to report on their condition. I speak Russian. I heard what this man said. He said he's being tortured. I'm going to report on this. This will not look good for our bilateral relationship. And I had good enough relations with him where I could speak that freely, in a sense. And he said, okay, just wait. Nothing's going to be done precipitously. Just, take it easy. No public announcements. And eventually they were released. The sort of personal side of this is a couple of days later, I was feeling very badly. I went to our clinic and the nurse, we didn't have a doctor, just a nurse, said, you may have tuberculosis. Have you been exposed to anyone who could be a carrier?
Wow.
And I thought, no, of course not. And then suddenly I remembered I'd shaken this man's hand. And tuberculosis was a well-known disease spreading throughout the Turkmen prisons. So that kind of brought home how personal, some of these political things can get. thank goodness it turned out to be a false alarm. I did not have tuberculosis. But again, we didn't have a lab. So I had some pretty anxious days waiting for the tests to come back.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's just one example out of many, to be honest. You mentioned Turkmenistan, and that scene came back to my mind really vividly. But yeah, it's really hard when you see local people being abused, as I did. Obviously, when I was in communist-run countries, when I was in the Middle East, I saw people being abused, and you have to get that balance where you put American interests first, and then on the sides, you do what you can to help.
Right. And also with the understanding that our country is not perfect. And I
Absolutely.
think you have to be so emotionally mature about that when you go and meet with these people that are under, because we're not saviors. We can't come in. We have our own issues. We see how bifurcated our country has become, how violent parts of our country have become
Yes,
with
absolutely.
crime. And so we definitely are not the poster child anymore for, law and order with the kind of issues that we have. And it's humbling when you become a diplomat and you only want to think the best about your country, which is the right attitude. And then you get into a meeting and people pull out photos and journal and say, "What about this? And what about that?" And it gives you a chance to say, "You know what? I'm trying to help you with your country, but when I go back in between my assignments or whenever I can help my communities vote, I'm going to look at that because that's something that I know my country can fix." Not all diplomats can do that.
No, I
Can,
agree.
and that we had so many years of apologizing for the United States. There's so many other things we can do. We don't need to cover up. And I think President Trump and his team have been very good about, look, we've got things we need to fix too, but we're also going to make sure that our interests are going to be taken care of. And one of the interests of our president, and I'm going to segue here to an area that you have a lot of expertise in, and I somewhat have expertise. Victor has expertise, and that's Russia. This week we had a phenomenal, if you listen to the press, it was a disaster, right? If you listen to the press that they should have never had it in Alaska, what was Trump thinking? Putin played him. I mean, depending on what you're watching in the news, it was a disaster or it was brilliant, depending on who you're listening to. I think it was definitely brilliant for many reasons because I think as a diplomat in places where conflict existed, I was in Afghanistan, I spent time in Pakistan. You want the war to stop. You want the fighting to stop. You want people to be able to be at least safe while discussions are going on. And I know that that's what President Trump wants. That's what the First Lady wants. That's why she wrote a personal letter of appeal to President Putin, just to get the killing to stop. And this week we had that fantastic what I thought gesture by both presidents. I mean, President Putin to come all the way to Alaska, where he's from, was not an easy trip. It isn't like boom, boom, he's sitting at the edge and he just comes over 45 minutes. That's not how it works. He made the effort to come. And President Trump, I thought you saw his real showmanship and producer type mind with the layout there that he had, and with our planes there. What planes were on the runway there, Producer Victor? Were they? I'm not a good at my aircraft, but he had, fighter jets parked, and then he did the flyover with the B-2 and additional fighter jets. And I think we have that clip, Producer Victor. And once we play that, Ambassador, I want to ask you what you thought about the optics and then where we think this is going to go.
Yes, and to your question, I believe those were F-22s and
There we
the
go.
B-2 bomber. So let me play the clip here.
If you're a marketer, that was a photo op of photo ops right there, and it sent a message of strength. You have President Trump on the one hand being very gracious, being a good host, being very congenial, I think being very genuine, President Trump, and inviting him and welcoming him to Alaska, but also showing him the strength of the U.S. military and how important it is for President Putin to realize that if he goes too far in a different direction, he's going to have to deal with us potentially. And that was a very clear message and I think President Putin, being a former KGB agent, understood the optics of that moment very clearly, and it put him in a position. So, Ambassador, your thoughts about Alaska, then your thoughts about where this goes, and then anything you want to share with your own experience as a diplomat in Russia. I know things have changed from the time you've been there, but still.
Yes, I must say that whenever I think of Russia, I get really nostalgic. Like I mentioned before, my first posting was Poland. It was working with the Polish opposition, with Solidarity, with the Catholic Church. And then a couple of tours later, I was in the USSR, which then was the heart of darkness, where I found a lot of analogies. I was also deputized in the political section to work with the Orthodox Church, which had a lot of opposition to the regime, though even more muted than the Catholics had been. I worked with dissidents, handed out, I'm not even sure if today it would be acceptable. I handed out Bibles.
That would have been a bad thing.
I did all sorts of stuff with the samizdat people. I met some absolute heroes who were literally risking their lives, their children, their spouses' lives, risking going to a psihushka, against their own will into a psychiatric facility, because of course anyone who advocated for freedom, any kind of freedom, political freedom, religious freedom, whatever, was defined as a psychiatric case by the regime. I mean, I met amazing people. And then I came back yet again after another tour in another country. It was the early 90s. It was a free Russia starting out as a democratic country. Another analogy to Poland, I was deputized to be the liaison with President Yeltsin, because earlier when he had been a dissident, I had been his go-to person. So this time around, I'm the go-to person to the president of the entire country. Amazing stuff. People literally, if they would see me on the street and realize I was American, people would hug me. There was such a pro-American attitude in Russia. And I feel so nostalgic about that. It's really sad what has happened. And I don't want to go into detail of who to blame. I'm just saying that I remember how it could be and how it was actually. And, I've been retired for a number of years now, so I cannot craft the pathway back. I have utmost confidence in President Trump. I have utmost confidence in Secretary Rubio. I think that they're the best people for the job. And I yearn for a climate where we go back to being friends with the people of Russia, not necessarily the government, but the people to people is so important to me. And again, going back to what is diplomacy, one of the greatest gifts that you get as a diplomat is you get to know the people of the country you're stationed in. And some of them are not very nice, but some of them are fantastic and admirable. And so my first thoughts on this summit was, as yours, Patrick, this is the right thing to do. Talk, talk, talk. Don't fight, but talk. And something will come out of it. I'm really optimistic. Like I say, I really respect President Trump. I think he is a fantastic deal maker. If anyone can do it, he can do it. I really trust him. And I remember President Obama being pilloried in the press at the time because he said that he would talk to the Iranian regime. And I thought I was then still an active duty diplomat. Well, thank goodness.
Yeah, me
What
too.
diplomacy
I was
for?
very supportive of that. And with Cuba, his initiative in Cuba, I was very supportive of. When you're
Exactly.
a
I mean, we
diplomat, you
don't
see
talk.
the value in people from the outside who get the message, their news screened by ideologies sometimes. A
Exactly.
lot of times.
And
They
that's why
didn't get
I'm
that
really
flavor.
optimistic because President Trump, on top of being a great deal maker, he's also a pragmatist. When he talks about common sense, I think he really means it.
Hmm.
And so he's the kind of person who can talk without just saying, okay, by talking, I'm validating you. No, you're not validating someone by just talking to them. You're listening to their point of view. You may absolutely disagree, but you're hearing them. And that's so important. And I just think that the president, in whatever way, that he'll pull something off that will surprise us and that will elicit the world's gratitude. Because just as a side, recently, before President Trump came back into office, let's put it this way, I was talking to some high-level individuals serving in our government at a very serious venue. Obviously, I can't say who and where, but it was a very serious venue. And they just told me there are moments on the Ukraine crisis where we feel the possibility of a nuclear exchange with Russia is about 50%. And they contrasted that with the Cuban Missile Crisis, where they thought it had been around 33%.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to me, that's unacceptable. That's horrifying. And they were actually discussing it rather calmly as well. It's regrettable, but this is where we are. I think a person like President Trump would be, no, this is not acceptable. We cannot be at a 50% destroying the entire world situation with the other large nuclear superpower.
Right.
And I'm just so grateful that the president is taking this very seriously. He's talking, he's de-escalating. I think he will find a way forward. I can't figure out because I'm not the president, but I think he will. And I'm very happy that Alaska happened, that the summit happened. Obviously, I'm showing my age. I mean, we had regular summits with the Soviet Union. I mean, the Soviets, no kidding, were absolutely horrible people. And yet we talked to them. And I'm glad we did. And we did nuclear treaties. We tamped down the rhetoric on nuclear war. And then somehow that got away from us. And we started talking rather openly about the possibility of a nuclear exchange. Another thing that came to my mind when I saw the Alaska clips was back when I was still a student of international relations, I was an avid Henry Kissinger reader. And Henry Kissinger's absolute New Testament-like decree, never allow the two communist giants, China and Russia, to make common cause. Whatever you do, American foreign policy must be set at separating those two.
Yeah.
To me, is the height of wisdom. It is the absolute cornerstone, I think, of any global engagement. And yet, in the past 4 years, during the past administration, we saw China and Russia going closer than they've been since they were the two big communist allies. And I personally was horrified by that.
Yeah. And you have this
so
trifecta with Iran as well, excuse me, but
yeah.
even Iran coming in and having this trifecta, if you will, I don't want to call it an axis, but you have this trifecta of these three countries that really, they don't want us to succeed. And so it's good to hear you as someone who's been an ambassador, who knows a lot about the region and about Russia. I know the next steps for the president are to get Ukraine on board. There's a lot of information out there right now, and we don't know how much of it is true or wishful thinking or not true. And then we also have spin. I mean, one of the things I wanted to ask you, Ambassador, and you followed the press over the years as a diplomat and watch it devolve, not evolve, but devolve into what it is right now. And there are so many people, reporters, people on TV, people doing podcasts, people doing whatever that have large audiences cheering for President Trump's failure and not thinking what you just explained to us about the threat of the reality of a nuclear holocaust on the world. And they're cheering and hoping that he will not be successful. Just your thoughts about that. I mean, as a psychologist, I can't stand that, but because it's so unhealthy for your own psyche to have that kind of negativity in your life. But it is widespread whenever you turn on the television.
Absolutely. And as a former diplomat, as a former person who represented the United States abroad, for whom it was the greatest honor of a lifetime to do that, I cringe. I'm absolutely horrified at the language that people allow themselves to use, Americans, about their own president. They would never use that kind of language about the president of, Botswana or even North Korea, but somehow insulting the sitting president of the United States is seen as virtue signaling. I think it does the country an enormous disservice. It makes us look really bad abroad. I'm still friendly with a number of ambassadors. One Central Asian ambassador in particular recently told me, he said, well, if Americans hold their own government in such disrespect, have such a lack of esteem for their own government, then please don't go around preaching to us what we should do. You go and fix your own problems, and let's hope that no more preaching from you guys.
Right.
And I said, well, I agree with you, Mr. Ambassador. I said, I would be hard pressed how to go around preaching to you about how your president should do this, that, and the other, when so many of our intellectuals seem to feel like our own president, is a fascist or God knows what else. I mean,
A
it's
Nazi, the Nazi thing, for someone who's Polish, I mean, it's just terrible. But what's also interesting is you had the people that are more conservative on the right kind of fight back after what happened to President Trump from his first term. And that it started when he came down that escalator, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And then you did have retaliation against President Biden on the right. And so we got to get to a point where we stop this tit for tat and we start treating ourselves not as red or blue or whatever we may be, but as Americans, because that's what our enemies want us to do, is to fight amongst ourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, one sort of joke, but not really joke, going around in the Middle East is, what's the smallest club in the world? The smallest club in the world is the club of retired Arab presidents. The idea being, if you lose power, you're dead or in jail. You're certainly not going to a club. We cannot allow our country to devolve into that kind of situation. One of the most admirable things about our democracy is the peaceful transfer of power, no lawfare, no imprisoning anyone else. We've got to step away from that brink. You're absolutely right. If we go tit for tat, we go lower at every tit and at every tat. We go a step lower.
Yeah, there is this argument that if you don't show the other side consequences, they'll just keep doing it when they get power again. There's some truth to that too. But it makes it hard when you're overseas as a diplomat, when your country itself that you love and know is one of the greatest countries in the world, if not the greatest, to be so bifurcated and so divided and so tribal. And that wasn't ever us. I remember growing up and in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in a Polish American town. My family, all Polish immigrants. And it was the Polish, Democrats, who by today's standards would be very conservative. But
Right.
they were the Kennedy Democrats, and President Kennedy would be very conservative in my mind. But
Absolutely.
and we you could meet people who had different political things, but they were your friends. You never had any kind of animosity, uh, regardless of skin color or whatever it may be. There was none of this that we have now. And so I think what we need is going forward as we wrap things up here. I want to ask you a couple questions about our future diplomats and the future of American diplomacy. Is how do we get people that really understand that to give their lives to go be diplomats? And it isn't just cocktail parties. It's not like James Bond's movies. It is hard work. You're moving all the time. You split up your family sometimes. Your kids are angry at you every time you have to move every few years, but it's for the right reasons. But how do we get younger Americans, or just Americans, maybe they're not necessarily younger, but they want a career change? How do we get them to do this job?
Well, as we mentioned, I do a lot of mentoring with a lot of young people, particularly young women, but not only. And there's good news and there's bad news, but there's more good news than bad, I would say. There's a lot of patriotism out there. There really is. Sometimes I think our generation maybe gets stuck on this thought, oh, we were the last patriots or whatnot. But I find a lot of young patriotic women out there who want to serve their country. Now, the bad news is that they come from educational institutions, from universities that have drilled into them that in many cases the United States is bad. The United States was founded in evil, the original sin, slavery, etc. And so they have some, they're divided in their own perspectives. On the one hand, they love their country. On the other hand, they worry. And also there is this globalist approach, again, that comes from the education environment, that somehow the United States, while not the world's policeman, is somehow still the world's, is responsible for the world, doesn't get to dictate, and yet needs to save, give money to help, etc., everyone else. So what's really lacking is, America first, because I certainly, as a patriotic American diplomat, I wanted to help other countries, but there was no doubt in my mind that my job was to first promote America, what's good for America in that particular country. And then, like I said before, as a side sort of bonus, if we can have a win-win situation, and what's good for America is also good for the people I'm living amongst, and often it was, well, then that's great. But still, your first job as an American diplomat is to do what's good for America. And here I find, again, people are muddled. They kind of understand it, but they think that that's kind of evil. That's not virtuous to put America first. And I fault the educational establishments, which give all these signals out there that somehow America is, in a sense, responsible for all the evils in the world, therefore responsible for righting all the evils in the world, can never get anything back for having done all this good stuff. So how can you be a diplomat in those circumstances? I think the long term is reform our educational system. Reform these schools like Georgetown, of which I'm a very proud graduate, but I go back and I see that Georgetown is, in some cases, part of the problem. They're also spouting forth that America is kind of a bad country, and et cetera, et cetera. But there's still a lot of patriotism out there, Patrick. There really is. And going back to something else we mentioned, geographic diversity. I think reforming some of our East Coast and West Coast universities, but also tapping into some of the more, may we call it, sane, practical universities in the Midwest and the South, would go a long way to righting the ship of state, or the state of the ship.
Well, I always tell my friends that I'd much rather be at a barbecue in flyover country than a brunch in DC.
There you go.
It just the type of people that you're in, and you don't have to put any airs on when you get invited to the cookout. And we need those people serving our foreign interest overseas and putting America first. Ambassador Gfoeller, thank you for joining the show. It's been a fascinating discussion. It made me very nostalgic since we served in many of the same places. We're going to bring you back on as President Trump and his team continue to develop foreign policy with peace through strength, and bring you back on for your thoughts.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
In a world full of noise, clarity is power. Stay informed, stay aware, stay top of mind.